rápido un resumen de quién es John Draper, la persona que nos acompaña en este momento.
Listo.
Compartirá algunas de sus anécdotas en sus días como freak de la telefonía, hacker e innovador, desde su tiempo en el Homebrew Computer Club hasta ahora. Explicará cómo y por qué hackeó, cómo fue convivir con Steve Wozniak, Larry Ellison y Jerry Pournelle, qué enseñanzas le dejó su paso por la cárcel, cómo le ganó a Bill Gates en un reto tecnológico y finalmente, por qué los campuseros deben mantenerse siempre inspirados para hackear y explorar el mundo. Un gran aplauso para Captain Crunch. Thank you very much, Captain.
Hello, hello. And thank you very much for welcoming me.
¿Está llegando?
This has been a great experience for me,
Oh.
and I cannot tell you how enthusiastic you people are. This is just blowing me away. And this has to be the biggest geek fest of the likes I haven't seen in a long time. Well, I guess I ought to start off with my old stories first, how I got involved in phreaking. I was stationed in a very isolated and very unforgiving place in northern Alaska where you have 6 months of day and 6 months of night. And it turns out that there are a lot of need to make free phone calls. The U.S. Air Force, in an attempt to provide their people a little bit of a morale boost, would allow the personnel of the base to make free phone calls. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to make calls whenever I wanted to, not just during call night every Friday. So it took me a little while to figure out how to hack into the Air Force network, and I hacked into the White Alice system and the NORAD Autobahn network, and I was able to reach operators that were very close to where I lived, and I was actually able to make phone calls from the base. And then I was stationed in Maine and did the same thing. When I got discharged from the U.S. Air Force, after about maybe 6 months or so, I was had accidentally ran into some blind kids. It was quite an interesting connection. I was experimenting around with the FM transmitters and put an FM signal on the air, and it was heard about 3 miles away when a blind phone freak, Denny, called me up and told me he heard me. I gave out my phone number over the air. So, and that was sort of how he found me. I kind of recognized his voice. He gave me a phone number. It turned out to be a loop number, but when I called it, all I got was a tone. So about 2 weeks later, he called me back and must have mixed my number up with something else. I said, I remember you. I tried to call you back because I wanted a signal report, but what did I get? I got this tone. Tell me about it. And then he told me about this loop around numbers. He told me he was a blind phone freak. And I said, what's a phone freak? And he started to tell me that he had about 20 different ways of making free phone calls. At the time, I was not working, and I thought that would be a very nice thing to know. So I made an effort to get out to see this guy. I go into his house after his parents let me in, leads me to his room, totally dark. I mean, totally. I said, come on, turn on the lights. I'm not a blind person here. I'm a sighted person. I need light. So at that point, I was exposed to how blue boxes work. And I says, tell me how to make phone calls. Denny, another kid there, had an organ. And he had the organ hooked up to the telephone line. And he said, what number do you want? And I gave him the number to a buddy I knew in Maine. And so he hammered out the number on his organ. And it just, I heard a little high-pitched whistle. And then heard a little noise, a little chirp noise. And then the call went through. I said, is it that easy to make phone calls? Yeah, all you have to do is dial an 800 number. Any 800 number will do, as long as it goes over a long-distance trunk. And I said, I was just fascinated by that. So I went home and built a blue box. And what a blue box is, it's a tone-generating device. It generates tones. And it's a combination of 700 hertz, 900 hertz, 1100 hertz, 1300 hertz, 1500 hertz, and 1700 hertz. And then each tone had a certain weight associated to it. The 700 tone equaled 0. The 900 tone had a 1. And the 1100 tone had a 3, or a 4 rather. And then a 1500 had a 7. And then they had a special tone for 1700, which was used to open and close a call. So you had to send a tone which with this funny 1700 hertz tone at the very beginning of the call, and then you banged out the number and at the very end. That's how blue boxes work. And I'm going to now play a recording of what it sounds like to make a blue box call, along with what it sounds like to stack tandems. I don't know if you're hearing this audio or not. Do you guys hear it out there? I'm not hearing the audio for my demo. So I'm calling my stagehands up here. Oh, here it comes. There we go. A normal
The number
call.
that's ringing at this point doesn't matter. What's important is that this call has gone over a trunk from New York to a distant 4A, which can be reset by 2600. That's the supervision handshake, off hook, on hook. And now it's waiting for new digits, which Ben will supply. Stopping the tape now, what he dialed was 216-054-064. These are old routing codes. The network of the 1970s had routing codes for tandems in all major cities. The first code, 216054, is the routing code for Youngstown, Ohio. The 064 in the area code of 216 is the routing code for Canton, Ohio. Both of these are crossbar tandems. When Ben keys in this sequence, the 4A into which he is keying picks up a trunk to Youngstown, Ohio, and sends 064. That tick is the 4A cutting through to Youngstown, Ohio after having sent 064. Now what does Youngstown do with the 064? Well, it picks up a trunk to Canton, that's the code for Canton, but having been sent only the routing code and no digits to follow it, it simply dumps us into the Canton trunk without sending anything. In other words, it stacks. That's the sound of Youngstown, Ohio dumping us into a trunk to Canton. And that's the handshake from Canton. Canton, Ohio is now ready to receive digits. That's 054064. This causes Canton to pick up a trunk to Youngstown and send 064. Now we're in Youngstown again, which stacks into Canton, and then Canton gives us the handshake. And we'll do another 054064. Now we're in Youngstown again. Youngstown stacks to Canton. That's the handshake, and here we go again. Same digits. Youngstown, Canton, handshake. Now the connection has gotten so long that the handshake is all you can hear. Now on that supervision flash you could really hear multiple links both on the off hook and the on hook. He's going around again. That was such a short flash that you didn't get to hear all the on hooks.
Well, there you go. That was a tandem stacking demo of what it sounds like to stack tandems. Now, Doorbell, the name of the guy who you heard, whose voice you heard, has actually mentioned those 3 digits that begin with an O, he did not mention that you had to begin the code with a key pulse and end the code with a start. And that's why you heard 8 digits instead of 6. So if that might have confused you, that was the reason why. Okay, now this here is the next recording I have here is a very, very long tandem stack. This has got to be one of the world's record tandem stacks. It's also going to show you how you can wink back and what it sounds like. And you could hear the wink back crawl toward you as it goes through all these different links back to your phone. And you could actually hear it. And it's really an amazing thing. What's happening here is all he's doing is just picking up the phone and hanging it up.
Shorter and shorter. Almost there. Ah, there you go.
Yeah, he's doing short flashes.
Yes. And sometimes they're so short they don't even get all the way back.
So here we have a disconnect. What it sounds like when you actually disconnect from the call. And so go to part 3. This is what happens on the other end of the phone line. The reason why we can hear both ends, the reason why you can hear both ends of the call is that what Bill did.
Let's fast forward to the calling in.
What Bill did was he called the next phone next to him. So he could put the recording on the called phone and then put the recording on the calling phone. The first set of tones you heard was him winking back on the calling phone. Then he switched the audio recorder on the called phone, and so you get 2 different sounds, and it's a little bit longer when you're dealing with the called phone. I'll go start the tape now, we'll finish up. And the called phone, yeah. Mr. Audio? Yeah. And here he's
148
flashing.
at the beginning, then all crossbar. Okay, now we'll hang up the calling end. Get ready for this. Here we go.
This is a hang
Make
up.
sure we're recording.
All these
Okay,
connections are
so,
dropping
we're
off.
going to disconnect.
There was something about sitting on a connection like that late at night. I mean, even if you were alone.
Oh, yeah.
It was, I mean, this may sound nuts, but it was a comparable experience to being up on a beautiful mountaintop.
Okay, there you have it. What it really sounds like to use blue boxes back in the day. All of that equipment you heard is all gone. It's in the junkyard. All of the switching equipment, all of the equipment that sent that those trunks were using, it's all replaced by digital. Now let me talk a little bit now about my earlier computer experience. After I was busted in 1972, I ran across this person, and he said he had a friend that had a computer in his garage. And I thought that was pretty interesting, so he took me over there to see this guy. And this guy had just bought for $80,000 an HP 2100 mini computer running BTI, Basic Time Sharing Inc. software, and you could run BASIC on it. You can go up to a terminal and you could basically say HEL dash and then a code, and that would be your login ID, hit return, password, and then hit return, and you would be connected. It would come back and say ready. And then you could sit there and you could type numbers into it. You could type in basic programs, and you could load your basic programs on punch paper tape. And once you got it loaded in on punch paper tape, you can then save the program in your account. And that was sort of how I got involved in computers. I thought that was really cool because I was doing voice scrambling circuits, and I needed something to calculate all these complicated formulas for filters. And I found out that my HP calculator that Steve Wozniak gave me wasn't going to cut the mustard. I needed a real computer. So I started writing programs for it. Then one day, the owner of the computer company came and saw some printouts of what I was doing and was very interested because it looked really cool. I was displaying waveforms and circuits and all this stuff, and he thought that was really cool. So he offered me a job, and that was when I first got involved in computers. He rented me an ASR 33 teletype and got me an acoustical modem, and I took it up in this really nice place where I live, up in the hills, in just behind Cupertino. And I was the envy of all my peers in college. I was going to De Anza College in Cupertino. And later on, I had done an interview on KPFA about the demonstrations of blue boxes, not unlike what I was showing you here. And the show was so fascinated, Woz heard it. When Woz heard the program, Woz said, I got to build me one of these things. So he knew that the frequencies given in the Esquire article were not the right frequencies. So he went to the university library and got the Bell System Technical Journal, and in there were the frequencies. So he built the device that would generate those frequencies. It was a digital device using countdown circuits. It was really accurate in frequency. The only problem with it was a square wave. And when you send a square wave into the phone line, you get all kinds of subharmonics. And some of these subharmonics will then cause equipment in the phone company to trigger and alert. So I had heard about Steve from a friend of mine that worked for KPFA, told me that I needed to meet this guy. So I went down to the UC Berkeley campus. And I met him there, and I met his friend Steve Jobs, and a few other of his friends. And we sat down and we tried to get the blue box to work. And I told Steve it's not going to work because the tones are not sine wave. So he fiddled around with it a little bit and was able to get it to work. And Woz said to me, well, can I call the Pope? I said, I suppose, if you knew the number. So I said, okay, well, let's get the number. So what I did was I basically I got the Rome inward operator, and then I contacted and then I got the number to the Vatican, and then I called the Vatican, and handed the phone over to Woz and says, here you go. Well, Woz tried to talk to the person at the Vatican, and he didn't understand a word of English, so they had to wait a little bit until I find somebody that can speak English, and finally the person said, the Pope, oh, he's asleep. We can't talk to the Pope right now. He's unavailable. And Woz says, oh, please, I really need to talk to the Pope. I really have to confess. So after a little while, he finally hung up the phone. And so Woz's box was pretty popular. He sold the boxes. He used the money to sell the boxes to make the Apple I and to make the PC boards for the Apple I computer. And one time, Wozniak was on his way from Berkeley to his house in Mountain View, or was it Sunnyvale, and on the way his car broke down. He stopped by a payphone to make a call. Thought it would be a really cool idea now to actually use the blue box to make a call. So he tried it a couple times, and every single time he tried to make the call, the operator came on the line. Unfortunately, at that time for Woz, it was not possible to dial direct 800 numbers from payphones. You had to call an operator and have the operator connect to you. This was back in like 1970s. Back then they didn't have it was a pretty primitive system. So, and then all of a sudden a cop comes rolling up. And Woz sort of had the box in his hands at the pedestal on the payphone, and the cop said, "What's that?" And the cop took the box away and Woz said, "It's a synthesizer." And the cop was playing the little buttons and stuff like that. And the cop says, "It sounds like it's out of tune, and how come there's only 10 digits?" And Woz says, "It's just a college experiment in college." And the cop handed the box back to Woz and said, "A guy by the name of Moog beat you to it." And then Wozniak said, "Whew," as he went rolling down back home, thanking the lucky stars he didn't get busted. Well, speaking of getting busted, as a result of a lot of people on the 2111 conference, and the fact that the 2111 conference is getting taken down by the Canadian government, by the Canadian Bell, it was 604-2111, and you could only get into it with a blue box. A whole bunch of people were up there talking, maybe 10 or 15 people, and as these people were talking, they were slowly getting dropped their calls as this network was being physically torn down because Canada was switching over to a multi-frequency system instead of using a single frequency system. Well, eventually what happened was these calls were being traced back to the original callers, and there was a whole bunch of people getting busted. Well, they detected the impurity of Steve Wozniak's box, along with one of the persons that I knew really well got busted, and I knew that my days were limited. Many had been subpoenaed, had my number. I knew then that I was pretty much ended. I had already gotten rid of all my equipment, all my notes and tapes and stuff like that. And on the way back from college, I was nabbed by the FBI. I eventually pled nolo contendere and got a fine and a wrist slapped and 5 years probation. As I was then going onward in years, I got across the PCC potluck dinners. The PCC potluck dinners were being put on by a small community of computer users, which had a PDP-8, and they were showing the computers to all of their children. And they were giving computer classes and things like that. Every Wednesday they had a potluck dinner. I brought Steve Wozniak to the potluck dinner. That was the first time that Steve Wozniak encountered personal computers. He then got a hold of a 6502 microprocessor chip. And with that, he started to build a whole bunch of really cool stuff. First thing he needed was a terminal. So he built a TV terminal, and a company called Call Computer was selling the terminal. He used that terminal to enter in the 6502 code that you see in the Red Book. How many people remember the Red Book? The Red Book was the first Apple II manual that ever came out. And that Red Book had the source code of the monitor ROM in the back, all there for you to see. Wozniak was a person that's always into openness, always into sharing ideas. It was Steve Jobs that his interest conflicted with Steve Wozniak. Jobs wanted everything closed. So Jobs wanted to make the Apple a big corporate thing and nice case, fancy stuff. And that was sort of the precursor to the Homebrew Computer Club. And then Steve Wozniak also demonstrated the Apple I in Gordon French's garage. It was the first meeting. The second meeting was in Palo Alto School, and I think the third meeting was where Woz demonstrated the Apple I. Marty Spurgell sold the latest RAM chips for the best prices you can get. The Apple I had no case, was only available as a PC board. It had 4K of RAM with integer basic and ROM. It used a TV modulator for a TV interface. Very limited functionality, but very, very rare these days. At about that time, I went to Lompoc Federal Prison as a result of my arrest, and I was working in a pig farm. And this is kind of funny. I wrote down the names of all the judges on each of the different swine that was in the piggery. And no one snitched on me, which was really cool. And it was in indelible ink too. It stayed there for the life of the pigs. I designed a RCA Cosmac chip, which was a CMOS CPU, while I was in jail, and wrote the code, and then I tested it on an emulator when I got out. I modified FM radio to tune to the guards' two-way radios, so I knew beforehand what the guards were doing, and they kind of was wondering how I was able to do that, or how anybody was able to outthink them. So I was pretty popular in jail. I mean, I had Phone Phreak classes. I was making loop arounds to make free phone calls, free collect calls. You could only make a collect call, so what I would do is make a collect call to a loop. Well, first all I'll do is I make a collect call to my friend, and I prearranged with my friend the number to the loop around number. So he denied the charges for the call, and it says, "I'm sorry, I can't take the call right now. I'm in the shower. Call back later." And so that way they weren't charged, and that was a signal for my friend to go on a loop, and then I would then call the loop around number, and then my friend would gladly accept calls because it would then be billed to the loop around number. Some of the pranks I pulled were over the few years here, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Long after I was busted, about in 1975, we had discovered the Auto Verify. It had just been put into Washington, D.C. and into Oakland. We found out that we could tap the FBI's phone number in Oakland by using this code. So we sat there day in and day night just to hear calls coming in, and I can remember one guy claiming that he was being tapped. And when you tap the call with these Auto Verify, you get a little beep, and the FBI agent said to this guy, "Looks like they got you tuned in, all right." Then the White House, later on, I discovered the CIA crisis hotline number by accidental scanning. The guy who answered the phone was extremely rude to me, which raised my radar, and I said to myself, "This must be an interesting number." So about 2 to 3 weeks later, I tried it again. This time, I put on my social engineering hat, and I called the person up, and I said, "This is White House toll switching system, and this is White Plains toll switching system in White Plains. We're having a translation error. What number have we reached?" And the person at the other end said, "This is the White House CIA crisis hotline number." And I said, "Well, sir, we'll get it fixed right away." So I made note of the number, and it happened to be in the switching system that you could auto verify. So all I had to do is to find the 7-digit equivalent to the 800 number, and that didn't take long. I knew that the last 4 digits had to be 9337, so all I had to do is to scan the 3-digit prefix until I found it. Sure enough, there it was. And so what we did was we sat on the line and we tapped it. And as we were tapping the line, people would call in, and then every time they call in, the person would say, "Olympus, please," and then the voice on the other end, I swear to God, it sounded like Nixon. And so we knew we had the right number. So after a little while, we called the number again, and we said, "Olympus, please." The guy said, "One moment, sir." And we got Olympus on the line, and we said to him, "Sir, we have a national crisis on our hands. Sir, we're out of toilet paper." And then we hung up. That didn't go too well with the authorities. But fortunately, I kept my yap shut and didn't talk about it until after about 15 years. I posted it on my website when I put my website up in 1995. That was the first website I had, well.com /Tell the Crunch was my first website. And that was when I first exposed to the public that little incident that took place. A year or two later, it turns out that Santa Barbara has got some very interesting old step exchange. So what we did was we tied 2 phone lines together. And if you call with 2 phone lines together, you dial out with 2 phone lines, one would go through, ring, and the other one would go busy. We kept doing it over and over again. All of a sudden we heard this loud scratch sound, and then it was dead. All of a sudden, calls started coming in. And what we did was we just flashed the call, and we offered supervision for the call, and we told the caller, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm trying to reach Aunt Mabel." "Who are you?" "Oh, we're running some tests on the line. Don't worry about it. Call back." So we knew we were then intercepting the major calls into Santa Barbara. We figured out that we were on the primary selector group. And the way it works is if you call a number, and if it's busy or the trunk is busy, it goes to the next trunk. If that's busy, it goes to the next trunk, onward. And so if you eventually call and that you're actually going to get the first trunk, and if that first trunk is off hook, which means it's free, on hook rather, it means it's free, well, guess what? You can actually cause a glare condition, and that glare condition then causes you to be able to intercept the call. As for a while, the guys were intercepting the calls, and we were telling callers that there had been a nuclear accident in Santa Barbara, and that they shouldn't call back because it was an emergency. And we were told every caller that. Eventually, callers started coming in, the press started calling, and then government officials started calling, and we figured by that time we better hang up. So we hung up, it all disappeared, and there was an article about it in the LA Times the next day. Some of the Woz pranks that we pulled. I can remember sometime when what Woz would do is he had this dial-a-joke phone line where you would dial a joke. And he would tell a joke every time you called his number. And he spent a lot of money on it. He was just now starting to make money from Apple Computer. He'd been making quite a few of them at this time. And now he was in a mischievous mood. So one of the pranks he pulled was he got an FM transmitter that would transmit on the same frequency that McDonald's quick food would use when you order your hamburger. So you walk up to that little speaker box and they say, "May I take your order, please?" Well, that was done over radio, over a 2-way, very low-powered radio. And Woz would sit over there in the parking lot with a much more powerful transmitter, and Woz would say, "May I take your order, please?" And the person would mention the order, and then Woz would say, "We're sorry, you're too fat. I'm going to order you a veggie burger instead." There was one time, too, when I went to one of Woz's parties. I often get invited to them as well. And I thought, oh, this would be a good time for me to pull a prank on Woz. Woz loves to watch his satellite TiVo and his TV set. He's got this big, huge TV set with satellite and all the channels you can ever possibly imagine. And so I have a gun diode. A gun diode is a microwave oscillator. It's very small in size. And I stuck it on the edge of the antenna disc, his dish. And he couldn't receive any TV channels for a while. Eventually he figured out what was going on. So yeah, I got back at Woz on some of his pranks. Sometime in 1977, I was on the East Coast working for a cable company. And I was at a party that got raided. 22 Pennsylvania State Troopers and 2 copters came in and swept in. I was living in the Poconos. It was a heavily wooded area out in the middle of nowhere. And I had a party. During the party, I hid all my phones. I didn't want anybody mucking with my phones. The only thing I had was my Apple connected to the phone line with my phone board that I'd been just finished designing for Apple Computer. And somebody had programmed the phone board to transmit on multi-frequency instead of standard frequencies, and was using multi-frequencies to make calls on my phone line. And that immediately was being watched, of course. It only took them about 20 minutes to realize that I was doing something illegal because they were watching me like a hawk. Feds came in, put a detainer on me, violated my probation, and I had to serve a little bit of time in Easton, Pennsylvania, and again I had Phone Phreak classes. They loved those Phone Phreak classes in jail. Absolutely. So I was sentenced to work furlough to a year, but since I was sentenced to a year, my attorney got me on a work furlough for just 3 months. So I would work during the day and go to jail at night. And I had to find a place to work, so I made a fake job. I got a bunch of Berkeley freaks who had this office space, and I was going to work, quote unquote, work for them. They had a letterhead with a checking account all set up, and I would give them the money to pay me by a check, so then I would take the check back to the work furlough person to cash in my paycheck to them. It was a perfect scenario for programming. Steve Wozniak loaned me his Cume printer, and then I was working on Forth at the time, and I was designing and developing EasyWriter on Forth. And it was so fast. I mean, it was calling machine language routines, and it was a perfect scenario for programming. I would print out the code, the source code, and then I would take it back to jail and mark it up and mark up all my mistakes. And I actually worked the code in my head. And that's how Russian programmers got to be so good. They programmed in their heads because they didn't have the hardware to run their code. And it took me only 3 months to write EasyWriter. At just about the time I was to get out of jail, I had only 1 month to go, I went to the 4th West Coast Computer Fair. The 4th West Coast Computer Fair was in San Francisco. It was a computer fair the likes nobody had ever seen before. I had made an arrangement with Matthew McIntosh to make the use of the Apple Pi booth, which was an Apple user group booth, right next door to the 4th Interest Group booth. Perfect symbiotic relationship at its finest. People would come up to the Apple Pi booth and see EasyWriter running blazingly fast and ask me, what language was it written in? And I would say it was written in Forth. And the guys at the 4th Interest Group would say, hey, what are applications written in? Go next door, look at the Apple Pi booth and look at EasyWriter. We got swarms and swarms of people. We couldn't copy the disks fast enough. We were selling them for $69.69. And we must have made about, I don't know, $2,000 or $3,000 from the sale of the EasyWriter disks. And we kept track of everybody that we sold it to. Matthew McIntosh was very meticulous, took down their names and addresses because we wanted to make sure that when we got it marketed correctly and got all the bugs out, we'd send them a good copy. And we had Broderbund contact us, Hayden Books contacted us, but the royalty figures were really, really low. Information Unlimited Software offered us an amazing 20% royalty. We snapped them up on that. They came in, the guy moved in from Indiana, set up offices in Kensington near Berkeley, and started Information Unlimited Software, West Coast Division. Matthew McIntosh and me started Captain Software, which was being marketed by Information Unlimited Software. Along the time we were using, as we were developing EasyWriter, there were 80 column cards that were coming out for the Apple II. We knew we had to make EasyWriter work with those 80 column cards. The software interface to these cards were very, very different. So I had to write drivers for each of the different cards and then make a standard common interface called a virtual machine interface. That meant that now it would be totally transportable because we used a VMI, but really is nothing more than a driver when you look at it today. And I knew it, and then, so all of a sudden, IBM approached us, and they wanted us to bundle EasyWriter with IBM PC. This was like 8 months before IBM came out with a PC. So we knew in advance that they planned to use the new 8088 chip, which was a subset of 8086. We went out and got a TEI mainframe 8086 S100 system with those big 8-inch floppy disks, and we ported Forth on that machine in about 2 days. Once we had the Forth on that 8086 machine, we started putting some other stuff together, And just about that time, IBM PC came and delivered us our first prototype versions of the IBM PC. They provided us with the IBM PC along with a parallel card and a serial card. And they told us, go ahead and develop the software. They gave us all of the code that we ever needed. They gave us the source code to the ROM. They gave us all of the code that we needed for using the printer and how to connect an interface to the printer, both the parallel and serial cards. And so once these machines came into the office, we looked at these computers and we laughed. Who'd ever heard of a computer with a detachable keyboard? Oh my God. So when we booted the machine up, it came back and said MS-DOS 1.0. We were using MS-DOS for our 8086 machine, which really was Seattle Computer Products DOS. And then we did a DIR, came back with autoexec.bat and all those 8086, Seattle Computer 8086 utilities, including BinHex. So we took the serial card, we hooked it up to the Apple II, and we ported over the code. Actually, we hooked it up to the TI mainframe, not the Apple II. We then ported the BinHex code over to the IBM PC. We BinHexed the BinHex into forth.com. We typed forth. It said OK. It took us 30 minutes to port forth on the IBM PC. I was excited, so I ran upstairs to talk to the IBM people who hadn't left yet, and I brought them down to show them the computer. And I told them, I said, you remember when I said it would take us 6 months to get forth on your PC? And they said, yeah, I lied. I have forth running on it now, look. And I said, forth, came back and said, okay. I typed in a few forth commands, and the guy says his jaw must have dropped a mile. He couldn't believe it. He says, I got to call Boca Raton. The very next day, all of the engineers of IBM came out to see this thing working. By that time, I had it hooked up to the Corvus drive. We had a Corvus Constellation, which was a ribbon cable connecting all of our Apple IIs together through a Corvus, which is this big, huge 10 megabyte drive, which weighed about almost 175 pounds. And we had ribbon cable running everywhere. So we took the parallel card, and with my hardware experience, I noted that it was a parallel output card, not an input card. Well, I made the output card into an input-output card by lifting the input-output pin and put a NAND gate in there, hooked that input-output pin to the read-write line of the computer, and now I could read and write data from the hard disk directly into the IBM PC. So by that time, we had the editor running by the time the IBM people came in and saw our work. And then they said, how were you able to get EasyWriter editors so fast? I says, well, what I did was I took your parallel card and I modified your parallel card. And they said, you did what? And I said, yeah, I modified it. He says, but you're not supposed to do that. No one told me I couldn't do that. So all I did was I lifted up a pin and put a NAND gate on there. And then their engineers, their hardware engineer says, did you know that they can do that? And so, because their hardware engineers were trying to figure out how we did it. So they took the card away from us, and they still couldn't figure out how to do it. And we didn't give them the actual code to interface that hardware card, because I had to do all kinds of timing loops and stuff like that to get it to work just right, because you had to wait for the data to be ready on the Corvus drive before you can try to read it. And you had to loop around a certain number of times until the data is ready, and then you look at the data ready line, and then when it's ready, you can then read the data. And that's how parallel card works. So and after a little while, we worked with IUS, and things started falling out when IUS decided that they wanted to have another EasyWriter program written by somebody else. So they came out with an EasyWriter 2 written by somebody else. They took our trademark, so we sued them for breach of contract for an undisclosed sum. After I left Autodesk, after I left IUS, it was a few years past, and I got a job offer at Autodesk working for CEO John Walker. John Walker currently works for CERN in Switzerland. And so Autodesk, I was little Johnny's boy there. No one would touch me. I could go home and work at home if I want. I could come into work anytime I wanted. and I got paid. And it was a pretty interesting group. And I was working in the future group with a data glove and 3D user interface for manipulating 3D objects for making CAD design and stuff like that, interface with AutoCAD. And eventually when Walker left, I had to leave, and there was a job offer from Apple at the ATG group. And unfortunately, due to bad timing, the new Prometheus League had published, they had made claims that they had the source code of the Apple Macintosh ROM. And the FBI was out after blood trying to find out who it was. And I was under surveillance by the FBI because I'd been in and out of Apple going to these job interviews and going home and Apple again, going home and back to Apple. Finally, after about the 6th interview, I was offered the job at the ATG. So I was going to go to work the next day. I got a call from Apple Legal says, don't bother to come in. And then I learned what happened. It turned out that about a week before that, I had been offered to go to the beer bash on Friday. This was after my last interview, and Walter, one of my friends who was living in near me in Alameda, moved down to Cupertino because he was I was using his VCR, and they saw me move the VCR from my car to Walter's car. 2 days later, I got an FBI visit. So don't tell me that I'm not being followed, people. I don't know about now, but back then I was, and that was more than 10 years after my bust. Well, eventually, things started happening. I started working, got involved in the OpenBSD user groups, and I built a firewall appliance on an OpenBSD box, and it was totally unhackable. I used a combination of snort and some really clever coding techniques to eliminate all kinds of nasty viruses and hackers and stuff like that. But unfortunately, as my timing always seems to be so bad, 9/11 occurred 4 days before we were supposed to fly to Chicago to seal a deal with Bank of America to sell crunch boxes into every Bank of America network. And we were also competing with Cisco and Check Point at the time, and they dominated the market. A few years later, I got involved I moved down to Hollywood, got involved in the media scene, and I developed a media management system for a program called Flixo. Flixo is a application program that would run on a Mac. And when you started up the program, it would display a bunch of channels and a bunch of little iPod icons that show up on the screen, and then the picture of a keyframe of the channel. And we had people like Warner Brothers, Fox, a couple of NBC. I lived right across the street from NBC. So we had all these major TV networks coming over, all these people that work in Hollywood, including a lot of movie stars, celebs were walking in and out of that place constantly. And I was CTO. I had about like 20 people working for me. I had 3 different groups. I had the Macintosh client group, the Windows client group, the Linux client group. I had the IT group and the IT and the administrator group. We had massive amounts of servers. We had an OC3, 156 megabytes per second pipe. And during the testing, I would take my laptop down to where that pipe came in on the router and hooked up my laptop directly to the OC3. And I wanted to see how long it would take me to upload a movie to the content delivery network. 9 minutes. 9 friggin' minutes. 10 minutes? Okay. 9 minutes to upload that program. I was totally amazed. I mean, this thing was faster than grease snot. Our wired internet in the office was 100 base T. Our cloud was 156. Our cloud was faster than our internal office. Eventually, investors shut down the company. What I'm doing now, I'm officially retired from programming. I cannot compete with foreign code monkeys out of places like Latvia and stuff like that. And now I'm writing my book, and I'm planning to do an iPad version of my book. And I've got Crunch Creations, which is my projects, EcoViso, which is my vision for how to fix our society together, because we are not living in a sustainable society. We are going to eventually collapse. Our financial system's going to go collapse because we're already in a Ponzi scheme. It's not going to take long before things are really going to get bad around here. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to contact people who are running sustainable communities. So if you out there know about any sustainable communities, you come up to me. I'd love to talk to you. That's EcoViso, ecoviso.com. Eco stands for ecology. Viso is Latin for vision. And then, of course, last but not least, the Geek Factory. Everybody's going to want to be part of the Geek Factory, but the requirements for getting into that Geek Factory are going to be very strict. You have no idea how strict it's going to be. And we'll just have to let you guys just think about it for a while. I'm not going to say much more about it than that. Contact info. Here's my contact info. And now that my contact info is up on the screen, I am now opening it up for questions. So is my interpreter here? Calling my interpreter. Yoo-hoo. My interpreter. We're now taking questions. I need somebody to interpret for me. Thank you.
You actually have interpret here.
Oh, yeah, but how is that interpreter always going to go this way?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I have an interpreter. Interpreter, can you hear me? Speak.
Yeah.
I don't hear you.
No, he's giving you thumbs up.
Okay, he can hear me, but how can I hear him?
You can hear. He'll translate the Spanish questions to your headphones.
Okay. So what's the first question? Does anybody have a question? Please raise your hand and go to where the microphones are. And you can ask your question in Spanish. Yeah. And by the way, what?
Raise the volume on your headset. 1 second.
Raise the volume on my headset. Okay, now I can hear my interpreter. Excellent. Okay, now I've got about 500 people from Gringoland watching me right now on stickem.com/crunchtv, which is the English version, being broadcast out to us language challenged gringos. So let's go ahead and have the first question, and I'm also going to be accepting questions.
We're doing questions through Twitter with the hashtag. We already put up.
Oh, we're actually, okay, I am advised that we are now doing questions through Twitter. Okay, so will my interpreter be giving me the question to ask?
I'll take care of the question.
Okay.
But first question is over there.
Where?
Oh, Rana? Okay.
Buenas noches.
Yeah, first question.
Buenas noches.
Okay.
Mi pregunta es, a lo largo de tantos años han aparecido lenguajes de programación, o sea, pasamos de C, Fortran, C++, Visual Basic, o sea, Python. ¿Cómo mantenerse actualizado? ¿Cómo no cambiar o cómo mantenerse en la línea a través de tantos años?
Well, because I'm a networker. And let me rephrase the question for the English-speaking people. The question is, how do I keep abreast of all of the different languages out there and all of the different systems out there? That's sort of like the nut of the question. And my answer is networking. I started the Programmers Network on the Well. I was a very active user. I was very active in user groups. Usenet, I would be able to go up and ask a question about, if I didn't know what the answer was, I would put it out on Usenet. And I'd get about 50 responses coming back. And I just have to decide which one is the best.
I have a question off Twitter now.
A question coming off of Twitter.
Okay. What is your opinion of Anonymous?
My opinion of Anonymous. Well, many people are asking me that question. I actually haven't got much of an opinion on them, except that they've certainly been getting a lot of attention lately. And as far as I'm concerned, they're not very good hackers, because a good hacker is not supposed to get a lot of attention. So eventually, they're going to get busted, eventually. Somebody's going to screw up somewhere, and somebody's going to wind up in cuffs. I don't know where or when, but it might happen. Go ahead. I have a question, I believe, coming in from, let's see.
Oh.
Yes.
We have a question from
Yes.
Okay, I got a question. Based on your wide experience of computers or the things that you have been doing for these last years of your life, what can you suggest to us as people that are developing new ideas or kind of ideas to improve this world? What you could suggest to us? What could we do to continue the hack way and use free software, private software? How do you see it?
Okay, let's see how I should answer that. Probably the best idea that I can give to young people that want to become involved in the software development industry and in software in general would be to study, experiment, and experiment. Get on that computer, try things, and I would first work with interpretive languages first. Orth and Python would be my first choice for my first language. Orth teaches you the concept of a stack, and that's very important that you know that. Python is very highly interactive, and if you type a mistake, you get to know what it is right away. After you've developed a lot of skills programming in Python, the next available opportunity that you should try to explore are other languages like PHP and Perl. These are also shell type script languages. And then of course you're eventually going to want to graduate to programming in C, which is the more serious language. Of course it's the most efficient. But to develop a program in C requires you to have a lot of knowledge about how to compile a program. You have to work on header files. You have to work with make files. And by the time you get to that level, you should have already had Forth and Python and all these other languages, even basic, under your hat.
Okay, I have a question off Twitter asking
Yes.
if you've ever been hacked.
Have I ever been hacked? Not really. I mean, I'm aware that that a lot of people are wanting to know, and be able to get access to it. My OpenBSD machine on webcrunchers.com is solid as a rock. I mean, it has all kinds of firewalls, intrusion detection systems. I know that thing is pretty safe. I let a lot of my, I have a lot of my servers right now, and that I'm using. I just don't let anybody know what they are. These are host names that no one's going to figure out. So obscurity is the first thing to security. You want to be as obscure as possible. If you can't be obscure, then you have to start putting walls in front of yourself. And of course, when I'm at home, my Wi-Fi, I have it password protected, as like anybody else should. And whenever I'm on a network, on my laptop, I make sure that I turn all sharing services off. I also turn on intrusion detection systems like Little Snitch and some other programs in case I happen to be at a coffee shop. So I'm pretty well protected. Nobody really knows my systems I work on. I don't tell anybody that, and the word has never gotten out.
Sir, over here. You've been doing hacking or... Hey.
Yeah, I hear you.
Well, you've been doing these things to hack the world. The 70s was informatics, 90s informatics systems. But now with the ecovision, are you trying to hack the problems we have with the oil companies, maybe the unsustainable these issues we are having?
Well, you know, to be honest with you, I haven't really done a lot of hacking in a long, long time. So I really don't consider myself a very good hacker. I'm not that experienced anymore. Hacking has evolved to such a fine art that I couldn't begin to get back into it again. However, I want to put out a challenge to you guys. Apple is coming out with iCloud. Be afraid. Be very afraid. That's all I have to say. It's a very closed system. We already know what Apple's been doing with the iPhone. You can't even put an application on the iPhone without getting permission from Apple. Imagine what it's going to be like to get permission to send your file or your pictures to your mother or your grandmother. Imagine that. Imagine cloud computing. Be very afraid. I would try to think really hard before I would consider using cloud computing, and I would also think very hard about what I would use cloud computing for. The first thing you're going to ask yourself about this is, what kind of information do I have, and how important is it for me to keep it private? And if you can answer that question, and if you can answer that question in the right way, and if you can use iCloud or any of the other cloud computing services out there, more power to you.
I have another question from Twitter, John. The question is, with regards to the Homebrew Computing Club and modern-day hacker spaces, do you feel that modern-day hacker spaces relate to the Homebrew Computer Club?
Indeed, indeed. In fact, I would strongly encourage your local community and your local communities to build hacker spaces. There are a lot of hacker spaces in the USA. A lot of these are pretty big. A lot of them are pretty formal. Some of them are informal. These are the very, very best ways you can get involved to meet other hackers of your interest group. Interest groups are very important as well. Join an interest group. If you don't have one in your area, start one. Because interest groups are very, very important. And that's how I became so knowledgeable. Because when I go to an interest group, I absorb all the knowledge of all those people in that interest group, including a lot of those people there.
Una pregunta, ¿qué lo inspiró a hacer todas esas cosas que hizo tanto en desarrollo y hackeo?
What inspired me to do all of the development work that I'm doing and have done? Well, that's a good question. I guess my own needs for something would be the first thing. I would like to have a certain thing. I needed a word processor for my work. There was none available for the Apple II. I had to write one. Thus became Easy Writer. So it just depends on what you really want to do and how easy it is to do it. And even if it's really hard, you could still do it. You just have to chop it up into small little manageable pieces and do it, in small chunks. Test each chunk, make sure each chunk works before interfacing it to the next chunk. Agile programming is the key here. And also wanted to extend a offer to those people that are watching me on Stick'em to also type in their question to me through the text chat system, and I will make sure to include their questions as well. So for those people that are watching me on Stick'em, please, by all means, type in your question. I can see your chats right here in front of me.
Okay. John, I have another question through Twitter. Basically, do you have a favorite technology or
a favorite technology
that you believe that no one else knows or that you feel doesn't have the appropriate amount of coverage?
Oh boy, you got me there. Never thought about that one. I mean, there's all kinds of really cool things out there. I guess my favorite technology would be 3D movies with astound sound technology. Sound that is totally in phase with your ears. It was something that I was exposed to at N2Go Entertainment.
Tengo una pregunta. ¿Cómo fue el reto que le ganó usted a Bill Gates?
Yes, I'm sorry I didn't mention that. During the development of EasyWriter, I was doing the IBM PC version because I got fourth on the IBM PC in 20 minutes and had most of EasyWriter written in a week. Bill Gates was also working on Microsoft Word at the time. So we finished our program long before Bill Gates finished Microsoft Word. We were going through beta test, and Microsoft was just thinking about doing a word processor at that time. And so this was why and how I actually beat Bill Gates. I'm not sure when Bill Gates started working on Word. I know that I started working on my word processor in about 1980, sometime around June or July of 1980. And I'm not sure. If anybody out there know? If anybody know, I'd like to know that myself. But we got our IBM PC 9 months later, after we knew that it was an 8088. So it didn't take us a long time to put together the product. Do I have any more questions?
John, I have one last question from internet. The latest one is, to what point do you think freedom of expression can be blocked on the internet?
To what point?
To what degree?
Well, it's starting to happen now in certain countries. I don't know about Bogota, but it's actually even starting to happen in the U.S. It's just beginning to happen in the U.S., I'm afraid to say. There are certain things that if you say or if you're doing something on the internet, like maybe copying a file, even though the file may or may not be a legal file, you may be blocked from doing that. Let me give you an example of another thing that kind of affected me personally. I've always had a liking to live in Germany. I'm very challenged when it comes to learning foreign languages. And I always want to look for opportunities to practice my German or even to watch German media. I cannot do that. I cannot download Deutsche Welle or any of the other German TV stations and watch it in German. I have to watch it in English. They do broadcast to English-speaking people, you know. So, oh my God, looks like I had 4,927 viewers on my Stick'em page, and it clogged my Stick'em stream because of so many people wanting to watch it.
Okay, we have one question on the internet, and I think we'll... we have one from the audience, sorry.
One from the audience. Where is that question? I see you over there. Go ahead.
Bueno, mi pregunta es acerca de Google. Digamos que antes sabíamos, o antes teníamos todo este software privativo, y digamos que los que estábamos como al favor del software libre teníamos como esa cosa contra el software privativo. Pero ahora tenemos empresas como Google que parecen tan abiertas y tan dispuestas a utilizar software libre y todo este tipo de cosas, y como tan buenas al frente, pero digamos que tienen como ese cuento de privatizar la información de las personas, o no sé, o sea, ¿cuál sería su opinión acerca de este tipo de empresas? ¿Cuál sería la opinión acerca de Google, digamos, de Facebook, de todas estas empresas que hacen, que tienen nuestra información?
Okay, the question was about Google and about how Google owns a lot of this information and about how Google often uses open source software, such as perhaps Google App Engine would be a good example. And there are also other Google apps out there that you have that you can get access to. And so this application would be would often be closed source. He's right, and so we have to try to take a stand on that. I have a question now coming in from the stream that I'm sending in U.S. I have a Stickum question. What are my plans for the future, and what projects am I involved with today? That's a good question. I'm involved with a lot of very interesting projects right now. One of the interesting projects I'm involved with is using old-fashioned technology to build alternate energy systems, perhaps using a steam engine to generate 2,500 watts to power car batteries, or solar systems. There's also the fast cap systems, which are ultracapacitors, which will beat the pants off of lithium-ion batteries. We're talking 6 times the capacity of lithium-ion battery, 6 times the capacity of lithium-ion batteries. They can propel a car up to 600 miles. Make a note, fast cap systems. Remember that. These guys are the future. In 2 or 3 years, they're going to revolutionize the electric car field. This is the kind of technology that I support. And I'm often want to get involved in hacker spaces and have people learn to build renewable energy systems, generating systems, electrical power, and using all kinds of interesting stuff. Just let me finish off by saying that sometime at the end of July, I'm going to be going to the Tesla Tech Conference in New Mexico. And these are going to be the people who are following Tesla's research. And I'm going to be exposed to some really awesome technology there, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Okay, we have one final question
One
from
final
the audience,
question?
and then we'll end the conference because we're running short on time.
Okay, so where's the question?
Right in front.
I see it over there. Go ahead.
Sabiendo la experiencia que tienes en esta revolución informática, ¿qué consejo le darías a las personas o comunidades que trabajan para romper la brecha digital en Colombia y en todo el mundo para poder llegar con más tecnología a esas personas que aún no tienen acceso a ellas?
The best advice that I can give will be to set up your own ISP, set up your own Wi-Fi networks over long ranges of several kilometers. Some people at the DEFCON, for instance, have what they call the Wi-Fi shootout. I believe the world's record is about somewhere like 50 kilometers or something like that for a Wi-Fi signal using highly directional antennas. So I see a lot of grassroots ISPs out there that are in totally remote areas that are really close to data centers that set up their own Wi-Fi connections through these high-speed networks to serve communities that live in or near those areas. And they have their own ISP, and they charge a fair price for the opportunity and service to get on the internet, and it's a little bit less cost than an ISP. And these are small communities in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Some of them are also using highly directional antennas going from mountaintop to mountaintop. So they're passing signals around through routers and Wi-Fi repeaters. There's a whole big Wi-Fi repeater system out there in the mountains. And so you could have a Wi-Fi repeater going from mountaintop to mountaintop. And from what I've observed here in Bogota, you guys got lots of mountains.
Okay, well, I believe that caps off the conference. On behalf of Campus Party and FuturaNetworks and all our sponsors, I'd like to thank you for your conference. Por favor, señores y señoras, muchas gracias.